You are listening to WRFG Atlanta. WRFG provides a voice for those who have been traditionally denied open access to the broadcast media through the involvement of a broad base of community elements to guarantee that access. In the utilization of the facilities and its programs, the following communities will receive first priority: those who continue to be denied free and open access to the broadcast media, and those who suffer oppression or exploitation based upon class, race, sex, age, creed, disability, sexual orientation, or immigrant status.
All right, my name is Heather Gray. The program is Just Peace, and I'm here with co-producer Ernest Dunkley. And I'm pleased to tell you that this evening we're going to be talking with DeWayne Lark from Houston, Texas, who's involved with the Pacifica Radio Station there in Houston, KPFT. Really looking forward to talking with DeWayne about his work in this and with media and just generally, and also what's happening with Pacifica Radio altogether, some of the struggles that are going on right now. So DeWayne, welcome.
I want to thank you for having me on, first off, and I'm looking forward to the interview.
Great. Well, you know what I'd like to start with, DeWayne, is your background, actually, how you got involved with media, and just something about yourself. How did you get involved with Pacifica Radio?
Well, let me go to the beginning. I was always struck by the concept of media, being a television child. Also, I heard radio at a very early age and was intrigued by the concept of DJing. At age 16, I decided I wanted to be a radio DJ. And by the time I finished high school, I attended Texas Southern University at their School of Communications, and that wasn't moving fast enough for me. So I talked to my brother, who was only about 6 years older than I, but was more economically advanced. And I talked him into paying my tuition to Columbia School of Broadcasting. And so I was going to Columbia School of Broadcasting, earning a first-class FCC license, which was a requirement in the 70s and 80s in order to be in front of a mic on radio. You had to have 2,500 clock hours from an accredited school. And Columbia School of Broadcasting was one of the preeminent, you might call it technical training schools in that era. It actually predated many of the schools at university. And so I earned my FCC license. And after that, I continued my studies at Texas Southern. And I got bored and I went into the Air Force. And I said, well, I was continuing my trek toward radio because I was an air traffic controller. And they also trained us in radio and radio repair and some other technical aspects of broadcasting because we were largely broadcasters over the FCC radio spectrum. But my real radio began when I worked for a local radio station in San Antonio, Texas, where I was stationed at the Randolph Air Force Base in 1981 and 82. And then I took a hiatus because the only way to get on radio really then was to go from small market to small market. And I just wanted the stability of being in the same location. So I started back up with radio with a radio program called Visions for Tomorrow here in Houston on KYOK, which is a historic radio station that primarily targeted and serviced the African-American market. It was two stations primarily called KCOH 1230, KCOH 1430 AM and KYOK 1590. And I was on KYOK for a while, and then I went to 1270 with the same program. And so that was my real first time producing my own shows, paying for my own airtime and things of that nature. And that was around 1990, 91. And then I heard about, I've been listening to KPFT Houston since I was a young person. In fact, I remember clearly when the station transmitter was bombed. And that I described the station, it was described then as an eclectic, in-your-face community radio, more like a quilted concept where you could almost hear anything from queer voices to avant-garde, in-your-face public affairs to local music extreme music. And so it really got me more interested, and I dwelled deeper into producing political programming in the Houston market from about 1995 to 2015. And then, to give a backdrop of how I got to be at KPFT, I had a massive heart attack in 2008. It was called a widowmaker. And I say that because I flatlined 3 times and the doctors didn't give up. Great. I thank them all the time for not giving up. Most of the time they call it after about 2 flatlines. And so the nexus between that is a co-host who was a local broadcaster and one of her producers convinced me to run for the LSB, the local station board. And of course, my family, friends, and neighbors, and those who care about me said, "You must be crazy. You just 1-2 years removed from a massive heart attack. Why would you take that on?" And yet I saw that there were very few African, I think it was only 1 or 2 African Americans on a board of 24 in a city the size of Houston with 24% African American population. So I took on the challenge. And that was in 2010. And I served there for about 5-6 years. I was elected vice chair 3 times. I was elected chair twice. And subsequently in 2017, a gentleman resigned the national board in December of 2018, I think it was. And I then joined the national board. And I've been on the national board since. I was the vice chair last year. And I just served as a board member this year. So that's my long history of radio. I think it's about 37 years, if I'm not, maybe 47 years. I missed the count.
Oh, fascinating, actually. Thank you for sharing that so much, DeWayne. I'm going to ask you also, so I was wondering, DeWayne, could you explain, you were talking about the station in Houston being bombed. What happened? What was that?
Well, it was the Ku Klux Klan who didn't like the idea of avant-garde type of programming. I think they didn't have a problem with the music, although it was a lot of rock, hard rock, acid rock, and they also had some political content. But I think it was the talk shows, particularly African Americans, who had a way in which to vent their frustrations of the 70s. And they thought they would take it off the air by bombing the transmitter.
And it didn't work.
No, it didn't work. I think the station was off there just a couple of days or so. And then there's a follow-up that the Ku Klux Klan did about maybe 8-9 years ago to show you what I describe as the sanitation of the station, the homogenization of the station. And that is that the Ku Klux Klan actually brought a brick that had tape surrounded around it with a $400 donation. And so some of us saw that as the Ku Klux Klan saying, "Thank you for your moderation."
Oh my goodness, really?
Yes. He gave a donation with a brick around. They didn't throw the brick, but I would admit that about 7 to maybe 9 years ago, some persons that we don't have a description of them, but they did shoot in the window of KPFT at our current location, 419 Lovett. So we still have a history of people not appreciating what is being broadcast. But I would be the first to admit KPFT 2021 is not the KPFT of 1975 or 1980 for that matter.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I don't know that we'll be able to get into all of that contrast right now, but that's something I'd like to talk with you about at some point. So one of the things that's really interesting that I've learned recently in some of our discussions, because just so everybody knows, I also serve on the Pacifica National Board, and discussing what's happening in Houston right now at the station. DeWayne, I know they're just enormous challenges, but I was impressed to learn that Houston is one of the most racially diverse and ethnically diverse cities in the country. That was so remarkable. It's so interesting. Go ahead.
We like to pride ourselves in believing that we have a very strong argument that we are the largest city with the most diverse population. There are many cities across the nation that can claim some part of diversity, but we believe we are the largest city with the greatest number of different endemic communities from around the world.
Oh, no, it's fascinating. Ernest, do you want to jump in here? Say anything? Ask a question?
Not at the moment. I'm getting an education about Texas.
Exactly. I am too.
Well, I do want to admit, and I'd like to put this disclaimer. Like most 82% of Houstonians, I was not born in Houston. 82% or more people who live in Houston today were not born in Houston. Houston has exponential growth. My parents, I was actually born in a little country east of here called Louisiana. And my parents moved me here when I was 5 years old. And of course, this is all I've known as home. But I do have two sisters who are part of that 18% that were actually born in Houston. But Houston is such a community that it's been very welcoming. There were only 250,000 people in Houston that called Houston home when I came to Houston in 1964. And now Houston will cap about 2.4, 2.5 million. And many of us are expecting the Census Bureau to announce that Houston has become the third largest city in the nation.
Oh, is that right? My goodness. So you're seeing more and more immigrants coming, I guess, from different countries as well, right? Coming into Houston?
It's a combination, but I think not being a demographer, but one who follows the demographers of University of Houston and Rice University, as well as those who represent the state, what we find is that about 70% of the people who come to Houston are migrants from the West, the East, the North, and even parts of the South, because Houston has been a mecca of opportunity. We call Atlanta, particularly for African Americans, the mecca of the East in terms of opportunities. But in that particular area, many of us perceive you generally have to have a college degree or above to actually take advantage of the economy in the last 30 years in Atlanta. But in Houston, because of oil and because of the diversity, particularly with healthcare, there have been many opportunities for people who were skilled in the Houston market. So yes, we do have a number of individuals who come from out of the country, but most of the people come because they're tired of the Rust Belt. Opportunities are disappearing. And California, just a caveat of understanding that when I was in the military, many of us who got out of the military, we went to California, land of opportunity then in the 80s and 90s. And so now those children who went to California from parts of the South, they're cashing out of their properties that they bought for $100,000, $200,000 at $300,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000. They're coming back to the South, particularly back to Houston, and being able to buy a mini mansion and still have money in the bank.
Oh, fascinating. All right. Interesting. So we could talk a lot, even more about this, I'm sure, DeWayne, but let's talk about Pacifica Radio and what's happening with Pacifica. There are some challenges right now to change the bylaws, the current bylaws that Pacifica has, by something called New Day Pacifica. So how do we start with this? This is a serious question, I know, but how do we start with this? What is your opinion about what New Day is attempting to do?
Well, I think the first thing I should tell the listening audience or the reading audience, that is, it is a redo. The group who call themselves New Day is not that very new. Their concept and philosophy of taking Pacifica to a more closed, controlled environment. That is to say that they basically come out of KPFA, the California station, one of the California stations, and a group here in Houston that's pretty much ran by what I call a puppet master, who used to be the chair of the national board as well as an IED of the national board. And you can do a little research and you'll find his name. But they just believe in a philosophy that's totally different than the membership. And the membership told them last year in their first due, no. In fact, it told them hell no with a 2-to-1 margin. And yet they would cause the foundation to spend another $100,000, $150,000 with this redo, which I believe is consistent with their view of bankrupting the foundation and then being able to siphon off the assets and be able to have what I call platitudes of autonomy. Platitudes of autonomy means that each station would be able to be on its own. It would not be under the umbrella of a foundation. And I'm one of those who believe in central governance. I believe that the foundation has served the purpose and it has lived up to the vision, not an expanded vision, but it's lived up to the vision of the founder of Pacifica, which is Lou Hill. All hail to Lou Hill. This young man used his gifts from his dad's bequest to him, and he used those assets to build a vision of having a radio foundation across the nation that would be, as one of my progenitors in politics said from New York, the foundation is supposed to be unbought, unsold, and uncontrolled and uncorporatized. And so Lou Hill believed that if you had free radio, FM was not readily accessible then. It was, a lot of people didn't have transmitters that provided FM signal. And so Lou Hill bought FM radio signal, the portable radios, and passed them out to people across the nation for that matter. So Lou Hill had a great vision. And those of us who share his vision believe that New Day is wrong to try to take a governance structure that allows for 22 representatives across the nation, including 2 from affiliate radio stations, and reduce that down to 7 or 8 handpicked people who will have control of close to $30 million worth of radio assets and be able to sell them or do whatever they want to do with them and really corporatize the foundation. And we were totally against it. Those of us who organized against it last year and defeated it with the help of the membership vote 2-1, we expect to do the same because nothing has changed. While their name has changed, their vision and their idea of free speech radio is not consistent with what we believe Lou Hill's vision is and was.
Well, thanks so much for that, DeWayne, that analysis. I appreciate that. It really is an effort to try to corporatize Pacifica altogether, it seems to me. You're agreeing with that, it sounds like.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, right. And the importance of community radio, I think people don't necessarily know enough about this. I think that it really is controlled by the community, owned and controlled by the community, because it's the community that supports community radio and Pacifica Radio. There are, in fact, about 210 stations, community radio stations affiliated to Pacifica that take some of the Pacifica shows and pay Pacifica for the use of those shows. Anyway, they are affiliated to Pacifica and are essentially owned and controlled by the community and not corporate America. That, to me, is so incredibly essential for a democratic system in media. And that's basically what you said, I think.
That's correct.
So Dr. King, I always am quoting Dr. King, he would say, well, where do we go from here? So you're optimistic about, now the ballots for this changing of the bylaws have already gone out. They went on June the 7th. So, and it's, the voting is going on throughout the month, right?
That's correct. In fact, if you're listening to this, or if you're reading a blog or however you're getting this information, and you haven't received the ballot, and you can find the election schedule on pacificafoundation.org, and you would need to request a ballot if you are a member of any of the member stations of Pacifica, and you can find you can request that at NES that's National Election Supervisor, NES at pacifica.org. But I would encourage each and every member to exercise your right. And if you believe that the foundation needs to be corporatized and needs to be a small niche of handpicked individuals to run it, and I would say run it into the ground so that they could have the autonomy. I believe there are members at KPFA, prominent members, that want to have that signal under its own control and not under the foundation. And there very well may be a unit here in Houston that shares that vision. But I share the vision that we should continue to strengthen the foundation. We should have a control mechanism by which we have a national governance that's a strong national governance but also some autonomy for local stations, which is what we have now. Incidentally, the way the structure is that we have local station boards that are elected locally, and then the local station board elect 4 representatives, 1 from the staff and 3 from the listener pool. And I believe that's a very strong form of governance. However, I would admit that as with any entity, as with any organization, there could be improvements. And I have called for, so that one would know I don't think in a vacuum, I have called for a national convention so that we could improve the governance structure and we could improve the bylaws, which this New Day claim they want to do. But in effect, what they do is they gut the bylaws and they put power and control in the hands of the few instead of what we have now, the many. And they claim that because it's in the hands of the many, this is why we're not able to refine, and we're not able to be as professional as we could be. And that's not true. I think that some people who've been around Pacifica's governance for some time now need to take some responsibility for the condition that Pacifica is in. And it would be my hope that those who have been around Pacifica governance make an assessment and take responsibility and then step out and allow those of us and others to come in who have professional expertise, who have the ability to raise funds, because Pacifica is struggling in terms of funding. As you may know, we're funded by members. We don't get corporate funding. In fact, we frown on corporate funding to our own detriment to some extent, because I frankly believe there are companies like my own small little company that could donate and will donate, and we don't have an interest of controlling. So I think we've got to clean that attitude up as well and accept monies from small to medium-sized corporations that are consistent with our vision and don't have any intent to influence our programming or anything of that nature. But I would say to each and everyone who, even after the election is over, join the Pacifica Foundation, find the station in your area or go online, pacifica.org. And you can listen to any of our stations on many apps. You can listen to many of our stations on the station's website, kpft.org, wbai.org, wpfw.org, kpfa.org, and kpfk.org. You can, it's great music, great public affairs, great news, and just take a look and take a listen at what Pacifica offers and join and become a part of saving Pacifica for the people and not for the few.
Well, thanks, DeWayne. That was wonderful. I do want to say also that I'm so appreciative of community radio having an opportunity to reach out to small businesses in their communities, right? I mean, we do that here in Atlanta with WRFG. We have small businesses that will underwrite some of our programs or the station overall. And it's a wonderful opportunity for small businesses to get information out about who they are and what they're doing. I've mentioned this routinely, actually, on the Just Peace show, that I'll never forget someone coming to me and saying, Heather, I'm eternally grateful to WRFG, because were it not for WRFG, I would not have known about this small business in East Atlanta that I just adore. And I thought, oh, that's wonderful. So, I mean, it is news and information, but it's a collaborative effort in the community overall. And I'm not talking about, of course, these huge corporate entities. I'm talking about small businesses in our communities and nonprofit organizations as well that will use our public access on radio, actually, to talk about what they're doing also. I mean, it's just a wonderful opportunity, DeWayne. I think that's what you're saying as well, right?
I am absolutely saying that. I've been saying it for a few years now, that when you look at the radio stations that are thriving in an environment when terrestrial radio is allegedly dying, and I am one of those who say that if you look at the trajectory of terrestrial radio, and for those who don't understand the word terrestrial radio, that simply means that when you get in your car or when you turn on your radio in the house, that you can hear a signal. That's not internet radio. That's not satellite radio. That's terrestrial radio. It comes through the airwaves and you're able to receive it through a module signal. And what that says is that it has been declining, just like the prediction that broadcast television would die back when cable came around, the prediction that terrestrial radio would die when Air America and all XM radio and all of those came around. Well, terrestrial radio is still alive. It's not as strong and it's not listened to by as many, but the reality is that people get their information, news, music by many different platforms today. So we are in competition for those many mediums, and mediums are being created almost on a yearly basis in terms of how people are able to receive and disseminate information, whether it be news, music, or whatever. So we are in competition. However, when you look at stations here in Houston, for instance, and I know this is the case in almost every media market, the KUHF, which is the equivalent of University of Houston's radio station, which is nonprofit, of course, and is separate from the university, TSU, KTSU, which is similarly situated. And then we have other religious stations that surround it on our dial. They're thriving. And the reason they're thriving is because they have what I call corporate support. Now, sometimes you may draw a line with some of the ones that they allow to support them, but you can't put your head in the sand and expect membership to continue to pay the bills and help you grow in such a competitive and dwindling environment. We like most businesses, we have a concept of diminishing returns when it comes to just depending on air donations appeals. So we've got to get with it. We've got to let the moms and pops, we've got to let the medium-sized corporations that are liberal, that are progressive in their thinking and their support, and we need to get on board and allow them to help us thrive.
Yeah, well, thanks again for all of that as well, DeWayne. You're listening to the Just Peace program on WRFG Atlanta. I'm going to ask Ernest to jump in here too, because Ernest, you've been involved with any number of media entities and radio stations around the world, right?
Yes, I have. And generally, they're all controlled.
I see. Okay.
And that says everything as far as I'm concerned, in that Pacifica really has something that I was listening to Pacifica when it first started in New York, and it was freedom. It was really getting to the best in everything. It had the best menu in New York in terms of music, culture, and information. And all of the other stations generally have an axe to grind, and Pacifica didn't. Or their axe to grind was good entertainment or good listening fare. And having seen the newspapers die and so much that was important in terms of bringing reality to the people, like those reporters that used to bring information, the investigative reporters, wherever they were in the world, they were the ones that really brought information to us. But now that's all been bought out by money situations that have turned off our ability to hear some reality. And looking at what's going on right now, Pacifica seems to be the only game in town. The internet has put up some people that can do some things because of the nature of the internet. I mean, in terms of bringing information, but in terms of terrestrial radio, it's I don't know of anyone else. And so many of the stations are now owned by conglomerates that there really isn't any unique radio out here to be listened to.
Except for Pacifica and other community radio stations, right? Is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, DeWayne, actually, Ernest spent quite a few years, I think it was 18 years in Nigeria, and involved with media there. What was media owned by the community there? What was it like there, Ernest? I'm just curious.
It's like it is in Britain.
I see.
It's owned by it's controlled by the government.
I see. Okay.
And that's the way it is in Japan too, generally.
Okay.
But it all depends on who the government is in terms of what you get to see.
Well, that's
in some places, I mean, thank God the government has control of it because you get to see some interesting things. And in some places, like where I was in Africa with so many of the stations that were under military control, you don't get to see very much.
Well, let's get back to Pacific. Thanks. I'm saying thank you to both you guys this evening. Thanks for that, Ernest. But let's get back to Pacifica here because there are such struggles right now, it seems to me, with this New Day Pacifica. I'm glad you are optimistic that they're not going to win, but we'll see. But what does it mean to be a member of Pacifica, actually, DeWayne?
Well, as with all things, I've probably been a member of something since I can remember, whether it was the Glee Club in elementary school or whether it was the captain of the safety committee, whether it was student council. I've always been a member of something. So for me to be a member of the Pacifica Foundation and specifically KPFT is that it provides me with a vehicle to say that I'm involved in radio, that I support what we describe here in Houston as free speech radio, that we provide a vehicle for dissenting voices to be heard. And I've always tried to be a person, a human, who was a voice of the voiceless. I can remember back as far as 10 years old when I joined the NAACP, and that
at 10 years old, my goodness.
At 10 years old. In fact,
great.
I was recruited by the secretary of the Houston branch of the NAACP who lived in my neighborhood, and she stopped by a little dead end, we call it, where we played basketball. Of course, the bigger boys played basketball. I did more watching. And she asked me and my friend, who was 3 or 4 years older than I and a member of her church, did we want to go to a community meeting? And of course, I was always politically inclined, even at that age. And so we said yes, and our moms and dads encouraged it. And at that time, I was able to join the NAACP. And not only that, about 2 years later, I helped form the youth branch of the NAACP and became the first president in organizing that. And that's just been my mantra and my pretty much tradition of always involving myself in what I consider to be entities that are moving forward, that entities that are moving communities forward. And so for KPFT, joining KPFT was an opportunity to give back. It was an opportunity to represent my community, which I felt was underrepresented on the local station board, and as an opportunity to influence content to the extent that I've never tried to tell managers or influence managers of our station what to play and what not to play. But I certainly, as you know, being served with me in the last 2 years on the national board, I can be a fairly strong voice in what I perceive to be representing the voiceless and representing the people who have sent me to represent their views.
Yeah. And one of the things about the station in Houston is that historically, the programs have been very diverse, right?
Historically, the programs have been very diverse, but as I said to you, KPFT is not the KPFT of the 1970s. So I believe now some folk is being given to KPFT. And I used to say when I first got on the board the year before last and last year, WBAI was consuming all of the oxygen in the room. And now I've pushed forth along with Lawrence Reyes' help, my friend and my cohort. He has helped me.
And he's in California.
He's in
California station in Los Angeles.
By way of New York. He loves to say that he grew up in New York. He was one of the young lords, and his mom was a freedom fighter under the Black Panthers. So he really has a pedigree of fighting. And he has helped me get some of the oxygen in the room to allow KPFT to breathe.
What are some of the programs that you like at KPFT?
But to answer your question more succinctly, there was a show called Self-Determination by Dr. Obadike Kamal that was on for 2 hours on Sunday nights He did give the show up after 10 years, and he was very successful in bringing in different guests across the country, writers, performers. He had Hella Belafonte and a number of other very rich people that everybody could identify with, and some people didn't know. And then there was Still Today Pan-African Journal, which is by a quote that deals with Pan-African issues across the diaspora. And then, of course, there's formerly Robert Muhammad, but Dr. Abdul Muhammad, who is the Nation of Islam's Southwest Regional Director here in Houston. I think he is over 6 states. He's had a longstanding program that was moved from 3 p.m. Recently to 10 p.m. And I think it's back to 3 p.m. And so those are the most prominent shows. And then I listen to Indie Media, which is, in my opinion, an eclectic group of representatives from all communities that give their view of local and national news. And then, of course, the La Palada, probably messing up the name because I'm not a Spanish speaker, but that's a young group of Hispanic educated professionals, Brian and a couple of others who have been broadcasting for over 20, 21 years. They also was moved from Tuesday, 7 p.m., and I believe placed on the H2 grid. And these shows that I've just described, some that are still going forward, I would argue and have argued that they should have been syndicated across the foundation because their content comports to all signal areas because it wasn't local oriented content. It was national, international content.
But that makes sense, though, that it should be national.
But those are examples of local shows that have originated out of KPFT that very well could serve the whole population, including some of the affiliates picking up that content.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, DeWayne, Ernest, you want to say anything here?
Not at the moment. It's been covered quite well, I think.
I think so too.
Well, I hope my 37 years of radio has come across in that I love radio. I've had a lifetime commitment to radio. I've never been paid, nor have I been attempted to be compensated from radio when I broadcast from a nonprofit or community radio. But what I'm proud of the most is that I've been involved at KPFT Radio. I've been a contributor to certain shows, political content. I've been known as a political commentator, a political analyst. But I've never had a show at KPFT. And the reason is because I never wanted any of my detractors to be able to accuse me of using my position on the board to find myself a show or being able to be on the grid. So once I retire from the board, I very well may offer my services because I do believe that KPFT needs personalities and need professionals who can bring value and who can bring money to the station. But I have refused to do that as long as I serve in the capacity of a board member.
Okay, well, thanks for that as well, DeWayne. All right,
thank you guys very much. And I want to thank DeWayne because he's touched on so many points that I really agree with. And hearing the ending about his lifelong work at helping the community. And that's very inspirational to me, that he's always found time to do for the community and to look for the upliftment of the greater community. And I wish you all the success. And I think you would do very well to come out and have a show of your own. As I was saying to someone just a little while ago, who is in a position like yours, in that they have experience in certain areas, and I was telling them that more than ever, you're needed now because of your experience and understanding. And this is the fruit on your tree. That is to say, you really come to fruition because you really do understand and you do carry it in your voice, and the sincerity and the understanding is there. And I think you might want to give up the board and get on out here and be a preacher.
And the only reason I would have reservations for that. And of course, Heather can attest to the fact that I often have asked myself, because I was challenged as a young person with this moniker. If not I, who? And if not now, when? And so if I descend, my concern is that who would ascend? And so I've always been one of those that wanted to be a very strong voice for the voiceless and to be a very strong voice for reason and righteousness. And so I've been looking for younger persons to come up and to encourage them to take on this responsibility. Because when I look at the 22 people on the national board and I look at the 24 folk on our local board, and if I thought there was a replacement, I would have given it up in a snap. But so I am inspired by God to do the righteous thing and to be the righteous worker and to, well, I strive for perfection. I know I'm far from it, because sometimes I even catch myself and say, well, you went a little too far with your effusiveness and with your passion. But yet I've been told, and I heard Dr. King say something years ago, that I have this fierce urgency of now. And so that's how I live my life, especially being 13 years removed from a widowmaker, that I have to do it now. And if I don't get it done, who's going to get it done? And then God reminds me sometimes that you're not the only one on earth. You're not the only soldier that I have. So I think the time will come very soon that I will give it up. I will give up the ghost and I will become a broadcaster on the Pacifica Airways. But I thank you for your kind words.
Well, I want to ask Ernest, you're sitting, Ernest.
Yes.
You want to comment about any of this?
And if you don't mind, Heather, I'd like to close by saying I have served as a chair, vice chair, or president of over 14 different local foundations here, as well as community groups. One of the ones that I'm most prideful of is the Harris County Council of Organizations, which was formed in 1948 in the Shiloh Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, because African Americans, then called Negroes, were very, very tired of being sick and tired, as they put it. And a man by the name of George T. Pop Nelson, who was financially independent because he had one of the most successful barbershops in Houston called Temple Barbershop in the heart of downtown Houston. And he helped form, and Barbara Jordan tells the story that she learned politics at his feet in his barbershop. And we still know that barbershops are the place where many of us talk politics. And so I say that to say the Harris County Council of Organization was responsible over the years for the first African American to serve on the Houston City Council. So the first is the group that caused the integration of the schools in Houston. It's the organization that actually caused the first African American women to serve and first women to serve on the Houston Independent School District. And under my leadership, it actually was able to be responsible for having the largest number of African Americans to serve on the Houston City Council with 16 members, and we had 7 at the time. So I'm very proud of that service, and I currently am the founder and chair of the Harris County of the HCCO Foundation, which is a foundation that particularly serves the veteran community and veteran advocacy, but also seniors, children, and the disaffected. So that's the capacity, along with KPFT and Pacifica, that I serve, and often with my small business that I operate independently as an independent insurance agency. God has been very good to me with the health condition that I do have, and folk often ask the question, how do you find the time to do it? And my answer is, I don't, but the God that I serve provide the vehicle and the mechanisms by which I'm able to serve. And I will continue to do so until I'm not able to do so.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks
Well
for that. Talking about service. Thanks for your service, DeWayne.
Well, thank you. We don't get that off, particularly from the African American community. That's why I'm a veteran advocate, because I found some years ago that veterans who came back home, particularly Vietnam veterans, they got spit on and called all kinds of names. But in the African American community, when I go out and you have on a hat or something, the Anglo community would tell you, oh, thank you for your service. oh, they recognize you. But the African American community kind of like put up their hands and hunch and say, so what? And so I've spent the last 25 years of my life serving the veteran community, trying to help veterans earn the benefits that they earn to try to get access to the VA, to try to get the benefits that they deserve, but more importantly, to recognize them and award them the common decency of a thank you for their service, because we enjoy freedom. And I know that there are many people who disagree with the uniformed services, but I would only say that I served, my dad served, my brother served the United States Air Force, and I wanted to continue the tradition, but I didn't want to kill. So that's why I didn't join the Marine or the Army. So I was very cognizant of what I was doing, and I served as an air traffic controller. But I say that only to say that our veterans deserve our thank you, because Russia and China wanted us to speak Chinese and wanted us to speak Russian and wanted to control these vast resources that we have in this country. And you'd be too naive to believe that if we didn't have a strong military that does wrong things sometimes and does evil things sometimes under our banner, but on the balance of it, we speak the way we speak and we live the way we live because there were men and women willing to put on the uniform and die for the preservation.
DeWayne, thanks. I just want to ask you one other thing before we go. In the military, what did you do in the military? Did you travel in the military? Were you going to other countries?
Actually, I have to admit that I was an air traffic controller, so I did do some TD, temporary duty in certain places, but I'm ashamed now to say that I received, right out of technical school, right out of air traffic control training, I received orders to go to Incirlik, Turkey, and would have allowed me a great deal of European travel. And I refused. In fact, I was able to get to a colonel to get those orders changed. And then they sent me to Azores, which is right out of Italy. And then I refused those. So I thought I was being blessed, but later in life, I realized I was stupid. And then, of course, I was given orders about 3 years in to go to Lakenheath Air Force Base in England. And I refused those and was able to get out of them. And then subsequently, I was offered to re-enlist with a $30,000 bonus and to go to England. And I refused. So no, I didn't travel.
You didn't travel, yeah.
I was a homeboy and I wanted to stay at home. I was serving in Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, only 2 hours away from home. And that's how I was able to connect and stay in touch with politics and what was going on at home, and at the same time serve in politics at San Antonio. So to answer your question, I chose not. My brother did a lot of travel around the world. He can tell those stories, but I chose not to.
Well, I just wanted to mention.
Okay.
So I lived in Singapore for a while and went to Vietnam in the 70s. So I went to Singapore. I went to Vietnam during the war, actually. That was really fascinating.
Okay, Jane. Jane, you met Jane over there?
Jane who?
Fonda. You know,
Jane Fonda. No, I didn't meet Jane Fonda. No.
She got so much trouble for going over there for years.
Yeah, so I remember she went to North Vietnam, didn't she? Mm-hmm. I remember that. Yeah, she did. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, but it was fascinating, though. I met a lot of the soldiers, and I won't go into all of that here. So thank you, DeWayne Lark, so much for this. It's just so appreciated. And thank you, Ernest, as always, also. So,
and thank you, Heather and DeWayne. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, you should have some other ideas and other additional programs, DeWayne.
Absolutely. And no doubt about it. I have a plethora.
We'll have that discussion. All right,
I tell folk all the time, Google DeWayne Lark. I'm an open book. My telephone number is published around the world. I have no secrets to hide.
All right, you guys. Thank you. Thanks, Ernest.
Thank you, Heather.
All right, later. Peace.
Nice meeting you, Ernest.
Same here.
Pleasure's mine. Bye-bye.
Okay.